Welcome back to Music Theory Logic. I'm your host, Andrew, and today's another Music Theory Breakdown. Today we're looking at a song off Certified Lover Boy, Drake's new album. This is going to be Girls Want Girls featuring Lil Baby. It's kind of a funny track. I enjoyed the beat a lot. Let's go ahead into the Logic session. So here we are in my recreation of the track. If you haven't seen these before, I'm not going to play the original. Since I don't have vocals, I'm going to play a shorter version of the track just because the track is really vocally driven and the beat doesn't do much more than what I'm going to play. Then we're going to talk about where these notes come from. If you find these helpful, you would help me out a ton by subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, here's my take on Girls Want Girls by Drake featuring Lil Baby. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and stop it there because once again, it's somewhat repetitive without the vocal. So hopefully you enjoyed that. This is going to be a pretty quick breakdown. There's not a lot going on in terms of chords, but I think it's a really tastefully produced track, and there's a lot of like really cool subtle elements that build and a lot of stuff in the background. So without further ado, this song is in the key of E flat major. The notes in E flat major, we have E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, and E flat. Now, essentially, the chord progression that's being used is the 1. Now, we don't hear a lot of the thirds, so there's a lot of the chords that are voiced like what we would call power chords. So we're just hearing 2 of the 3 notes from the chord, but fundamentally the chord progression is doing this. It's an E flat major into a G minor chord that's inverted into an F power chord, an F5. Technically, this note F, the second note in E flat major, would be a diminished chord. So that really changes the sound a lot of it when we do it that way. We could also describe this song is in the key of C minor. C minor is the relative minor of E flat major. I didn't do that because we don't find as much C minor harmonies, if you will, and our bass is that E flat. So our scale sounds like this. Sounds like a typical major major scale, and then here's our chord progression. And that basically repeats the whole time, and then we get some development. So let's look at the layers. I'm using 2 different layers. I'm trying to mimic the sound so that the beat sounds like the original. I don't know in any of these breakdowns if I'm using the same instruments as the original beat. I doubt it unless perhaps Drake's team's using some Arturia stuff. So all of the instruments I'm using are Arturia that you're hearing, aside from the drums, which are default Logic stuff. So let's go through this. Our chord progression is the same thing that I just showed you. We basically have half notes of chords. There's a lot of space in this track, a lot of like ambience which is kind of cool. It's not super like like the sonic space isn't just filled to the max, which kind of creates a cool vibe and works really well with Drake's style. So here is this layer on its own. So that's the E flat. Here's that G, the F, E flat, G, F, E flat. And chord wise, that's literally happening the whole song. But we get some cool development that will happen in these later layers. So again, this is exactly the same MIDI. It's just a different VST. This is solely at the purpose of mimicking, again, the sound of the instrumental. So one of them has that subtle wobble. Another one is a pad that grows later in the half note. Thought it sounded pretty similar to the original, but again, it's not perfect. So same MIDI, same exact chord progressions: E flat major, G minor, F5, not the full F diminished chord. Our cymbals, super standard. We're at 87 beats per minute. We're doing a standard backbeat, so clap on beat 2 and beat 4. If you happen to have my music theory text, if you don't, I'll link to it below. But in the text, in the rhythm chapter, I talk about the backbeat. Backbeat, I say, is played by either the snare or a clap or something that really stands out in the mix. And the standard backbeat is beat 2 and beat 4. Sorry about that. Should have had my phone silenced. All right, the hi-hats are doing steady 16th notes, right, like that. So just on a closed hi-hat. So if we look at those drums while we listen, it sounds like this. So really simple. But again, the sort of slow, sustained build up, the lots of space. This drum works really well. It's just like a driving thing. We hear the drums for 4 measures before we hear our 808. The 808 is hitting one note. It's a D sharp and E flat. Those notes are the same, referred to as an N harmonic. Now, this is basically our kick drum and our bass line all in one. It is happening on the first beat, then it's happening on the second 16th note of the 4 quarter notes. So this is some syncopation. That's why it stands out. So we're on the second and the 4th 16th note on beat 4. If we're talking quarter notes, so 1, 2, 3. After the 4th quarter note, we're on that next 16th, and then the last 16th. Next time, similar, we're on the beat 1. It's a shorter attack, so I have the 808 or shorter sustain. It's not holding as long, so I shortened that MIDI or that audio, as you can see. It happens on beat 1, and then we do it on the second 8th note after the 2 or after the 4th quarter note. So that is a different rhythm. And then finally, that's going to essentially repeat. So it's going to go like beat 1, measure 1, beat 2, measure 2. Beat 2 repeats in measure 2, measure 3, and then beat 1 comes back for the final one. So we're hitting on the 1 again, slightly longer. You can see that from the audio. We're hitting on the same 8th note after beat 4. Then we do not hit on beat 1, so that's the one difference. And then we have basically a slight variation of beat 1. So we're on the second 8th note after beat 3. So right here, and then on the second 16th note after beat 4. So that's the same as the first measure of the 808. So this is actually different. Cool. That basically repeats our whole time. Something like this. Cool. Pretty simple. it's a 4-measure phrase or a 4-measure pattern for 4 of these boxes. And yeah, pretty straightforward. One note, really smooth 808. One side note is it's really punchy in the track, but it also doesn't have any like high end to it, which makes it really like soft around the edges. So the EQ, I'm doing a lot of that. Increased a little bit around 75 hertz. And then I used a high shelf to roll off a lot above like 750 hertz. To my ear, that helped a lot. So going on to our lead. So our lead instrument, it's really, really subtle. If you listen to this track, it's off in the background. It sounds to me like a vocal. So using Melodyne and a background vocal or a vocal chop type thing, we can create a melody. I'm using another Arturia synth that is based on a vocal. Now, the notes we're doing are different than we've seen before, but these all come from our E flat major scale. So we're doing B flat, that's the 5, that's in our chord. We're doing a C, that's our 6th, that's also in our chord, that's our relative minor. And then we're doing a D, it's also in our scale, that's the 7th scale degrees. So we're going 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 6, 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 7, 6. And again, that's really subtle in the background. I'm using Little Altar Boy by Sound Toys to push down the pitch and the format. Makes it sound even more like the tripped out vocal in that track. Those sound like this together. Cool. And again, that's another 4-bar thing. It's essentially 2 measures that keep repeating. And that's basically used for the bigger sections of the beat. So it starts out, we get a verse into kind of a mini chorus, and then we get the additional layers. They happen for a while, they go away, and then they'll come back after some time of the verse, whether that's Drake or Lil Baby. So going to our final layer, we have this bell. It really comes out after the 808 goes away in the first section right here. Now, this bell like top line is something that if you know the chord progression you're using in your song, it makes it a lot easier to write this because each of these notes just comes from our chord. So on the E flat major, the first chord we're doing in this measure, we get a B flat. That's in our chord. That's the 5th. Perfect. In our G minor, we get a D. That's also the 5th. And then in our F5 chord, we get the root note F. So we're going B flat, D, F. Once again, that all sounds like this. Cool. So hopefully you found that helpful. If you have any questions about that, leave them in the comments. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to, at the best of my ability, answer any questions you may have. Hopefully you enjoyed that breakdown. Not a ton was going on theory-wise, but that almost makes it a better one for those of you that are less familiar with music theory. We saw E flat major. We saw some cool development of the sound design by adding other notes from the chord later in the song. Pretty straightforward. It doesn't have to be a super sophisticated or lots of notes happening to be a really cool groove. So hats off to all of the certified lover boy producers and the people that made that record possible. If you found this helpful, you'd help me out a ton by subscribing to the channel. And if you do that, I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful day. Cheers.